Lights turned on. I'm feeling, maybe it's the mood of the night.
Ready to go? Okay, thanks everyone. Welcome to the Ordinary Council meeting of the 17th of August 2021. Welcome members of the public gallery, nice to see you. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay our respects to elders past and present. Didn't know they were dimmable. Thank you, CEO. So we'll go straight to public question time and receiving of public statements. This is your opportunity to come up to the microphone and speak. There's no order, it's just whoever would like to come forward. We just ask that you state the number that the item number that you're speaking to, state your name and the suburb in which you reside, and we do time you to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm just here for Lot 7, 179 Carr Place. I'm Jason Collins from Collins Property Group and Agenda 9.1. Just want to...
Jason, could we just have a suburb?
18 Arbordale Street, Florets.
Thank you.
I emailed you all during the week following the briefing council meeting. I just wanted to reiterate the following points. Regarding scale and bulk, the design review panel is in support of the proposed built form and scale, advising that the scale and massing of the proposed development is acceptable. There was no objection from the City of Vincent planners or neighbours regarding the scale and bulk of a proposed development. While appreciating that the proposed development is technically within the regional activity area, it is on the periphery in a landlocked position tucked around the back of Bold Court and is surrounded by a range of single and group dwellings. It provides an alternative to multiple dwellings as well. Some townhouses will have a third floor home office. This will enable residents to work from home, which will provide a greater flexibility for residents to live and work within the regional activity area. Regarding landscaping, Tim Davies Landscaping has been engaged and a well thought out landscaping plan has been prepared. The proposed development will have at least 30 medium trees, 14 large trees as required by council. Taking on board the design review panel suggestions to create a pedestrian friendly walkway, it is intended that the proposed development will have a driveway comprising a mixture of different pavers and patterns to illustrate a pedestrian path. And having considered the comments from the council briefing meeting last week, it is now intended an additional 3 trees be planted on the entrance verge to Bold Court. Regarding streetscape, the proposed development has a very limited street frontage due to it being tucked at the back of Bold Court on a cul-de-sac. Unit A and I have intentionally been designed to have their balconies facing Bold Court and their garages around the back or side. In an effort to enhance the streetscape, it is also now intended that Unit G garage door will include windows. Finally, the proposed development has had the support of the City of Vincent planners. The proposed development received good feedback at design review panel, and the DRP recommendations have taken on board and incorporated into the proposed development. From over the 250 advertising letters, the small number of objections were limited to concerns about the access to the proposed development coming off Bold Court. This is unavoidable for reasons including the location of the proposed development and the WAPC green title approval that has been given. Given the location of the site, the proposed development is far better alternative to building a multi-storey apartment complex, which would necessarily result in increased traffic and parking issues along Bold Court and Carr Place. In conclusion, we believe we are compliant. We have worked with the last 6 months with the City of Vincent planners, the design review panel, to deliver a high quality housing development. Thank you.
Jason, just before you go, there was mention in the report that you were open to putting the solar panels on as part of the...
Yes, I agreed in email back to Natasha that that's totally fine.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks for the clarification. Okay. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Dudley Meyer, Highgate. I've just got some questions for tonight. Question 1, what council workshops have been held since the 3rd of August 2021 and what items are presented at each workshop? Question 2, and there's 7 subparts. On the 22nd of June, I asked 5 questions about the 2021 Waffle Grand Final, only one of which was directly answered. Can you answer the following questions with regards to this issue? 2.1. Were the football clubs given a date by which they had to respond when the EOI was provided to them on the 20th of April 2021? 2.2, wasn't any attempt made to make sure that the clubs actually received the EOI? If so, when? 2.3, was any follow-up email sent to the clubs seeking a response to the EOI before the 7th of May closing date? If so, when? 2.4, was there any correspondence sent to the clubs about the matter after the close of the EOI? If so, when was it sent and what was the content and purpose of the correspondence? 2.5, did the staff member actually say, "Oh, beep damn," or words to that effect? What do they mean by that? Question 2.6, did the city agree to provide some of the estimated $70,000 contribution? Did they indicate they could obtain funding from notable leadable business people? If so, who did they have in mind? And 2.7, can you confirm both the local leadable business community and the football clubs stood to significantly benefit financially the grand finals held at Leederville? What is the city's estimate of these financial benefits? I asked that question before but didn't get an answer. The third question is, the attachment to item 12.1 of the 27th July meeting indicates that one council member failed to comply with the requirements to complete mandatory training within 1 year of being elected, offence with a penalty of up to a $5,000 fine. Why did the report make no mention of this potential breach? And has the CEO taken any action with regards to the potential breach? And if so, what and when? And I have no issues with the breach. I don't think it's important. It's more the process. Question 4, at the last meeting I asked what documentary evidence had been kept to show that businesses had been contacted before their bins were removed. The response didn't answer the question and simply referred to inquiries and requests initiated by businesses. So again, what documentary evidence was retained which could help answer questions like, when was 10 Brewer Street contacted to verify they had an alternative waste service as requested by council? I did contact one business person and their response was, I can confirm that no one contacted me before they removed my bins. Question 5, why does the government property local law currently being advertised not show track changes so that community members can see exactly what is proposed, such as allowing bins on a verge 24/7 or requiring that verges be regularly mowed? It has a modified penalty of $250 for that one. Question 6, the report of the 18th of May about mini roundabout stated the breakup of support, oppose and unsure responses was 30-30-13. This is disputed by a community member. The attachment to the report showed that 22 correspondence responses were received and 52 engagement HQ responses were received, with each response being numbered. The question is, which category was each response put into and which were considered to be from the project area? And this must be easily available. It doesn't require any extra work. Thank you.
Dudley, I think in relation to your question on mandatory training, I don't believe there was a breach. I think it was that it was just split over financial years, but I'll just go to the CEO to respond because this was checked by me and I'm pretty sure that it was in the reporting year there were 2 units completed and in the previous year there were 2 units completed. So I don't believe there was a breach, but I'll just get that confirmed.
Through Mayor Cole, I'd prefer to take that on notice if it's okay.
It's just that I don't really like having something hanging over the council for a month that says that we didn't report something to the CCC where I don't think there was grounds to report.
Yeah, I'm quite certain that is the case. We definitely would report a breach if there was a breach. Just in terms of the reason why it's not a breach, I'm not exactly sure, but I can respond on email tomorrow if you like.
Well, I just want to say on the record that my understanding and from checking with the CEO and with individual council members who are obligated to complete the mandatory training, that all mandatory training was completed within the required time frame.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's my understanding as well, and we did follow that up with elected members. Just a quick comment in response to Mr. Myers' question around the invitation to host the Waffle Grand Final. That invitation or request did not come to the City of Vincent directly. That was a request which went from the West Australian Football Commission on the 8th of March to all waffle venues. So we host and have a lease with 2, East Perth Football Club and Subiaco Football Club. So it was the 2 waffle clubs that received that, along with all other waffle clubs who received that request with the details and requests, not the City of Vincent. But we did work closely with them, given that we have a shared lease arrangement, and we can follow up the other questions on notice.
Thank you. Any further speakers this evening? No? Okay. Thank you very much for your comments this evening and your questions. We will close public question time and we will go to requests for leave of absence. Oh, sorry, before we go to that, I'm just double checking. I'm pretty sure we didn't have any written questions tonight, but just to confirm.
Through Mayor Cole, yes, that's right.
Correct. Okay, thank you. And response to previous public questions taken on notice form part of the agenda. So item 4, applications for leave of absence. Have any been received, CEO, or are there any late requests? Okay, thank you. Item 5, receiving of petitions, deputations and presentations, just confirming that we have none this evening. Confirmation of minutes. This is in relation to the council meeting of the 27th of July 2021. Can I please have a mover and seconder to adopt the minutes? Moved by Councillor Fotakis, seconded by Councillor Hallett. All those in favour? I declare the minutes adopted. Announcements by the presiding member. Well, as everyone is aware, we do have a record capital works agenda ahead of us, and very excited that on Saturday on Sunday, this Sunday the 22nd of August, we will be reopening the Beatty Park indoor pool. We are celebrating by throwing the doors open and inviting people to come for free. We're not quite sure how many people might come down, but there has been a lot of excitement about this. And it's really fantastic that our swim school gets to start up again straight away on Monday. And all reports are that we're getting a great response for those that have remained enrolled throughout this pause in the service and will be returning. So on Sunday from 10 o'clock, we're welcoming everybody down, particularly young children that want to be reunited with their favourite frog slide and see all of the new play equipment that there is to enjoy. And we'll be having some fun things like mermaids and entertainment, so that should be fun. And just noting that the slides have been slightly delayed. Unfortunately, there is no slide manufacturing within Australia, and with COVID, that has caused delay. So we're still expecting the slides soon, and I think that will add some extra fun elements for the older kids and teenagers. And we're still completing indoor change rooms on the pool deck. So we're very excited to be reopening and getting that, getting swim school swimmers and little kids back into the indoor play area. And we'll continue to work around that to complete the works. That's really all from me for tonight. So I'll hand over to the CEO for declarations of interest.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the only declaration of interest received is, as noted in the agenda from the briefing last week from Councillor Fotakis, declaring an impartiality interest in relation to item 12.1, which is the proposed lease to Robinson Park Artist Studio. The extent of the interest being that she served on the Arts Advisory Group with one of the lessees. That's all, Mayor Cole.
Thank you very much. So in relation to items raised this evening, we have 9.1 raised by Jason Collins, and I'll take Dudley as raising 10.4 on commercial waste. In addition to these two items, would council members like to call forward items for discussion? Councillor Hallett.
12.1.
Councillor Castle. Councillor Wallace. Councillor Fotakis.
Information bulletin, please, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Loden.
10.2 and 11.2, please.
Okay. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. 10.1, 11.5 and 12.2, please.
10.1.
11.5 is absolute majority anyway, but so 10.1 and 12.2, please.
Thank you. Councillor Smith. Councillor Gondaszewski.
9.2.
Thank you. Just bear with us as we go through that and work out which ones will be carried on block.
Mayor Cold, may I ask a question, which is, I think, well, kind of a procedural question. A
Yes.
community member raised with me this afternoon that apparently the agenda as it appears on the website currently was different to what it appeared to them on the weekend. Can I just, I hadn't noticed that. Can I just ask whether the council meeting agenda had been updated at all in the last couple of days? So whether, since it was published on Friday, it was updated more than once? Is that...
Through you, Mayor Cole. So the agenda items and all the individual agenda items were published on the website on Friday, and we would have uploaded a consolidated PDF pack to the website as well on the Monday, but I'm just checking with Jordan that's the case.
Just confirming that what was viewable on Sunday and what was viewable on Monday was identical? Through you, Mayor Cole?
Through you, Mayor Cole, there would have been an additional PDF with the full compilation of the agenda available on Monday, which is just all the agenda items that were there on Friday put into one PDF document.
Congratulations, Councillor. We're dealing with all items tonight, excepting items 10.3 and 11.2. So can I please have a mover and seconder to move those two items en bloc? Moved by Councillor Fatakis, second by Councillor Wallace. All those in favour? No?
11.2, Councillor Loden.
11.2 or 11.3?
I've had 10.3 and 11.2. Okay, sorry, I'll go back to the drawing board. Sorry, we were speaking at cross purposes. I thought the CEO was telling me there were items to be pulled out and he was telling me there were items that were en bloc. So I'll hand over to the CEO.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the items being proposed to be moved en bloc are 10.3, 11.1, 11.3 and 11.4.
Okay, a few more items there. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Move Councillor Castle, seconded Councillor Wallace. All those in favour? Declare the en bloc items carried. So the first item that was raised this evening is 9.1, 177 to 179 Car Place, Leederville, proposed 9 group dwellings. Can I have a mover and seconder for this item, please? Welcome, Manager. Moved by Councillor Wallace, seconded by Councillor Toppelberg.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, I thought this was a pretty interesting application. Internally, the development presents at ground level as a series of doors and garages, with garages occupying about 3/4 of the frontage to each dwelling. So that led me down a bit of a rabbit hole on our garage width objectives and the built form policy and how its streetscape impact was defined. Thanks to the manager for the clarification in the briefing notes that the common vehicle and pedestrian access way through the centre of the development is able to be interpreted as a streetscape. It's my opinion that the dominance of the garages in the development is an unacceptable impact on that streetscape, but I also accept the manager's advice that the site is within a town centre and therefore the deemed to comply standards are not applicable in this instance. I'm otherwise happy with how the other deviations from the deemed to comply standards around land use, parking and landscaping have been handled, and noting the improvements in the landscaping plan. And otherwise, therefore, happy to support the officer's recommendation for approval.
Thank you. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I think it's an interesting outcome for the site. I think it's clear that neighbour support, because it's probably not surprising that where 5 stories is allowable as of right, that if something is proposed at 2, that neighbours are going to say that they're pretty chuffed with the result. The opportunity for it to be, for want of a better term, a muse style development, I think is how it potentially presents, but I think it clearly, and I don't begrudge the developer at all for doing so, it caters to the current market, but I think long term the use of those spaces and those garages, if you look in 20 years time, and particularly given its location, you would imagine the town centre of Leederville is one of the first places where you will see the disappearance of vehicles in the long term. And I think the adaptive reuse of those spaces will be an extreme challenge for these sites. I don't accept any of the commentary about the visitor bays being usable inside people's locked garages. I just think that's just not the case, but that's fine. If people need to come and visit, they will either find available parking and walk, or arrive by some other mode of transport, because essentially there's those 2 visitor bays only. Yeah, I am accepting of the officer's recommendation. I think that the way that whilst I am supportive, and I have a feeling I can sense on my left here that we're going to see a move to make the solar panels a condition of approval, I am not certain that the way that and I accept the applicant's willingness to accept that as a condition. I just don't know whether we have a basis in policy to actually demand it. But if that were to be forthcoming, I would probably support it, but I won't move that as an amendment myself. Yeah, I will support the officer recommendation as presented.
Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Looking at the comments, and while the development might seem a bit of a missed opportunity considering the site's proximity to the Leederville town centre, I think it does present with a number of challenges that have been touched on in the report: the limited access, the concerns from neighbours regarding the increased vehicle traffic, which should a higher density development be proposed for that site, I think would see that as an increased concern from the neighbours. But I think it's also a challenge to ensure that compatibility with the relatively low-rise established homes that are already on Car Place and Bold Court. And I'm not so much concerned about the underdevelopment as the presentation on this streetscape. And thanks to Councillor Wallace for nutting through that, because that was one of my concerns, the dominance of those double garages. And I do question, like Councillor Toppelberg, really the 2-bedroom dwellings, definitely highly appropriate in this setting. However, the car-centric focus of the development and the priority given to the double parking, I think, does detract from the ability of the development to maximise the livability of the properties through adequate living spaces and green space. So while I say that, I am supportive of the recommendation through from staff. But, personally, I don't believe the double garages for all properties would have been necessary. I agree with Councillor Toppelberg. I think it is that is the missed opportunity on this to future-proof those properties to what is an increasing unreliance or a decreasing reliance on vehicles, and particularly, really from that predominance on the parking fails to capitalise on the proximity to the Leederville train station. So I will be supporting the officer's recommendation, but I think food for thought for previous future developments that come before us.
Councillors, any further comments? Councillor Loden.
I'll ask Councillor Toppelberg's question that he inferred that I would probably ask around the solar panels.
Through you, Mayor Cole, if the question is that a reasonable condition to impose? There was some commentary provided in the briefing notes in relation to that. If that was to be imposed, it would need to be, or elected members would need to be satisfied that it's because the development, it's necessary for the development to satisfy the objectives of the Leederville Master Plan in achieving a sustainable development outcome, and that would be necessary to facilitate that. So if that is the rationale, then I guess that is available to elected members to impose as a condition. Administration has not recommended that as a condition.
So I am supportive of that rationale. And can you advise what would be an appropriate amendment for that purpose?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I have some wording that I will read out. This would be a new condition number 12, I believe, which would be titled solar panels, and the wording could be to the effect of the installation of solar panels as identified in the environmental sustainability report and template. Is to be implemented prior to occupation or use of the development to the satisfaction of the city.
Councillor Loden, do you wish to move that amendment?
Yes, and I'll speak to it if I can get a seconder.
Is there a seconder to the amendment? Seconded by Councillor Wallace.
Thank you. I'm a strong advocate for solar, obviously. I think we've had this conversation before, but I do agree that this fits within the plans that we have for the city and the strategy of the city as well. And I think this is an appropriate amendment, and we will see how this goes.
Councillor Wallace, do you wish to speak to the amendment? Does anyone wish to speak to the amendment for or against? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? I declare that carried. We're back to the substantive. Is there any further comments on the development application? I'll just quickly comment that I have been to site. This is quite a unique situation. When you drive up Carr Street and around into Bold Court, it is really like a little, don't mean, if I say enclave, I don't mean that in any disrespect. It's actually quite a special place, and there's some very nice single dwellings along Bold Court, and then you reach the end of the road, and then there is this large lot. So all of the questions that were asked last week were very welcomed, and I think that the managers responded really well in terms of what is a streetscape, where to, garage door width apply, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm satisfied that this development should be approved as is, and that it is a unique situation. Take the comments on board about double garage dominance, but there's no grounds for us to refuse on that basis. So I do support the amended motion. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare that carried. Congratulations. Okay, moving on to the next item raised from the public gallery, 10.4, which is the Waste Strategy Project 8 Commercial Waste Service Update. Could I please have a mover and seconder for this item? Moved by Councillor Hallett, seconded by... We've lost our zhuzh tonight. Come on, people. It's going to be a long meeting if we can't get this happening. Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm supportive of the report as is, but I did just want to ask a question in terms of the one from Mr. Meyer in the public gallery, just about the communication with sites prior to the removal and whether you're able to comment on that at all. I understand that it might be just taken on notice, but if you could talk a little bit about the way in which we're confirming private providers have been sourced prior to the removal of the bins.
Through you, Mayor Cole. I think the answer's already been provided by the Manager of Waste and Recycling in the response to Mr. Meyer's question.
It'd be good to have it on the record. I mean, I did ask this last time as well, but I think we do need to just...
Want me to read out the answer?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. So Mr. Meyer's question from last council was, have all businesses been contacted as requested by the council before their bins were removed? And what documentary evidence of this has been retained? So the response from the Manager of Waste and Recycling was, the council resolution from the previous council was that council requests administration seek to verify that an alternative waste service has been sought, including the proposed microservice where applicable at the time of removal of commercial bins between the 1st of July and the 31st of August. And as detailed in the council briefing report, item 6.4, Waste Strategy Project 8 Commercial Waste Service Update, and this is the key point, additional on-site and back office resources were deployed to answer queries and assist business owners if they had not yet secured a private provider. Back office support was also available for further support and to assess and process micro-business inquiries and applications. And to respond to Mr. Meyer's question about whether those inquiries were recorded, The answer is all customer inquiries requests have been recorded in the city's customer request management system.
Sorry, just to follow up to that, but there was no, I guess, notations taken on speaking out on the streets to people. It was only if they called administration.
Through my call, no, the additional person on site was dealing with people actually out on the street, and some of those people said they didn't know that we were taking the bins, and the bins were left to allow them. So that was recorded in the system as well.
So just to clarify, where they raised issues, it was recorded, but if it was just a simple, you're ready to go, is everything okay, was that recorded?
To you, Michael, not a simple conversation, you know,
So
an
only
exchange.
Sorry, don't mean to
Yeah,
interrupt.
but only if there was a request to retain the bins or a request for a micro-business service or something
follow-up.
exceptional, yeah.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Any further questions or comments in relation to this? Councillor Wallace?
Thanks, Michael. Can I just ask a question, how we disposed of the 5,000 bins that were removed? Where did we take them to?
Through Michael, so the bins that were in good enough condition to reuse were taken to the depot. So we have a small stock of bins that they can reuse. You can imagine a lot of them are not in great condition, covered in oil, etc. The rest of them were all taken to be recycled. So we received a small income for each bin that we took to recycling, and then all be remolded back into plastic items. Some of them will become bins again.
Reincarnated into another bin. I mean, that, your luck would have to be pretty poor if you were a bin again. Any more questions on this item? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Okay, they were the two items raised by members of the public gallery, so I'll go back and move through the agenda sequentially. The next item being 9.2, Local Planning Policy number 7.5.15, Character Areas, formerly Character and Heritage Areas Approval for Advertising. Councillor Gontaszewski moving, seconded by Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just to check, the title of this item says that the policy was formerly character and heritage areas, but isn't the previous policy called character retention and heritage areas?
That's my understanding too, but I did read what was on the page and I thought that might come up.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's correct. The previous title did have retention in it.
And it also had, yeah, okay. So supportive of this item, supportive of this new approach to character and heritage across Vincent. However, as was sort of raised last week at the briefing, I think that naming and wording is really important. Really pleased that we've changed the words character retention to just talk about character areas. However, this policy does also talk about heritage, and so I'm a little bemused as to why it doesn't say heritage in the title of the proposed policy, and just wondering if I could get some clarification on that.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, the reason that we did not include heritage in the title was because we want the focus to be on character. We had a lot of issues previously with making sure it was clear the difference between character and heritage. This policy is proposed to focus on character. We are reviewing our specifically heritage management policies at the moment, and this is on schedule to happen this financial year, and we would possibly look to have the heritage elements of this policy embedded within those in the future. But until then, we still feel that it is appropriate to not have heritage in the title, although we do talk about heritage elements because the focus is about the character, and we feel that we need to be very clear on this to ensure that people understand that character and character areas is very different to heritage.
So if a community member wanted to pursue a heritage area, this is the policy that they would look at?
Through you, Mayor Cole, currently, yes, that is correct.
Okay. I totally understand, but I don't agree at this stage. I think I would definitely be amenable once we had undertaken that heritage work to removing the title. But at the moment, you know, Google looking at things, I look at pages for 3 seconds, aside from council agendas that I read in much more detail. But like, you know, when you're scrolling, you want to find those keywords. And so I would like to propose an amendment to amend the title of the draft
Before you do
policy.
that,
Oh,
I'll
I
just
need the
go to the
seconder,
seconder.
sorry.
Do you wish to speak any further before you move the amendment? Okay. Seconder, do you wish to speak to the item?
I guess just to say, support the report and great to see this come forward. I know there's been some delays and capacity issues around getting through these nominations, but it's great to see them here. And I also just wanted to acknowledge, I guess, the hard work of people like Murray Sly and other community members who have been pushing for this particular area in terms of Cleaver Precinct for quite some time, and are very passionate about the area, and it is a very special place in Vincent. So great to see this come forward, and I would support any change to the title.
Thank you. Back to you.
Of course, I don't have a form of words. I was thinking that I could put forward an amendment that would leave point 1 intact and then just say subject to amendment of the policy title, or I'm just thinking, or do I just need to amend the title so that it says 7.5.15 character areas and heritage areas?
I like the latter. Is there any issue with that?
Is there any
No.
risk associated with that? Yep.
No, that's fine, because that's the only time. Oh, and you'd also have to do it in clause 3.
Yep.
So if character and heritage areas could be added to clause 1 and clause 3, then I think you've got that covered. Is there a seconder for the amendment? Seconded by Councillor Hallett. Any discussion?
Should we see it on a screen of some sort? Do we get to do that?
Wendy,
Sorry,
how's that
Wendy.
going? And again in clause 3, please, Wendy. Thank you. Quite simple. Any discussion on the change in title? Okay, I'll put it, all those in favour of the amendment. Declare that carried. We're back to the substantive. Are there any further comments? I would just like to pick up on the words that Jonathan expressed about the work of Murray Slythe, and I have asked our communications team to contact Murray, so she'd like to be part of our communications around this to, you know, recognise her and the role that she's played in bringing it to this point, because she has been a very passionate advocate. I just wanted to also say thank you for the changes that were made from the briefing. That was good to see, and very excited that we have a process that could move quicker. I like the fact that we could potentially have precincts set up where streets could opt into the precinct, because I think that's another way to make it even faster, where people can see what's happening in their area, understand what it means, feel comfortable with what it means for their street, and join a precinct, as opposed to having to go through bespoke every single time if it's fitting to already join a precinct, if the housing stock is similar and the desire for character on their street is similar. So that's good too, because I think that would be the next step in trying to streamline further, because let's be honest, it has been quite an arduous and slow process. And when you look at all of the effort that went into Mount Hawthorn and the final result, it was pretty hard going. So, and I think the other thing that is the mantra is that you do have to strike while the community support is there, and that having long periods of time between nomination and then going through the process has meant near certain death for some of these nominations along the way. So I think that the more efficient we can make the process and more responsive, that we'll end up in a better place in terms of preserving some of the character on our streets. So good to see this and happy to support it. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare it carried. Thank you very much. Moving on then to infrastructure and environment, we have item 10.1 e-permit implementation progress report. Can I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Toppelberg, seconded by Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I just wanted to have council refer discussion of the privacy matters to the audit committee, and so I will do so via amendment once the seconder has a chance to speak.
Councillor Loden, back to you.
Thanks. So just that recommendation as is there would become recommendation 1. Recommendation 2 would be that council refers requests the audit committee to provide further advice in relation to privacy matters relating to the e-permit system.
Seconder for the amendment. Several. Councillor Loden. Do you go ahead? You have the floor.
Yeah, so well, everyone was quick. You beat me to putting a time frame for that report coming back, but that's okay. I'll just presume that it'll be.
Would you like to add a time frame? It's not too late. I'll just get the seconder's endorsement of your time frame. I think a time frame is a good idea.
Okay, so with that, so it's the request for advice. So that advice to be provided to council no later than October 2021.
October. Okay. Thought you were going to say 22. I was going to say steady on. Is that supportable as the seconder? Yes. Okay.
So in theory, that then goes to the next audit committee meeting for discussion and whatever information needs to be sought. And hopefully there's time to provide that advice prior to October. If not, it'll appear in the information bulletin as a report to be actioned with an updated timeframe that we'll then approve effectively at that meeting by approving the information bulletin. But October might be a bit ambitious, but if it can, I guess that gets it to the next audit committee meeting. And if there's something to come back, it'll be reflected in the minutes. I should also note
just on what you've just said, I'll come back to that because the information bulletin's been raised for discussion, but that's not my understanding.
That was a question last week, and I think that was exactly the response. Was that
well, that's questionable. We'll come back to that.
Sure. I just want to also note that the work that's gone into some of the discussion that's been had with community in relation to the privacy matters, but I think it highlights potentially some areas of improvement across the board as an organisation, but this one in particular where we are potentially collecting data that people may view as being sensitive and how that data is managed. I think it's a good case study and something that should be dealt with through the audit committee process so that council can receive advice in terms of building our privacy policy going forward.
Councillor Loden, do you wish to speak to the amendment? No. Does anyone wish to speak to the amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare that carried. We're back to the substantive. Any further comments or questions in relation to e-permits? Okay, thank you. I'll put that motion as amended. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Okay, on to, I know we've dealt with 10.4, so we're moving on then to community and business services.
Point of order 10.2.
10.2, oh, sorry about that. My apologies. 10.2, tender IE 110 of 2021, pruning of trees, street trees using elevated work platforms. Moved by Councillor Loden, seconded by Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Mayor. I know the Executive Director would have been disappointed if we hadn't got to discuss this opportunity. Last week at the briefing, I did ask a few questions around how we're aligning our tenders to our strategic community plan and the priority areas that we focus on. And I've had some communication with the Executive Director in between around that, just to clarify the information that I'm looking for. It is a bigger and broader question about how we do tenders, so it's not proposing to amend this tender, which I'm sure the Director is very relieved about as well. When we made the changes to how we did our tender process and aligned it to the SCP rather than specific areas like Aboriginal employment or something like that, my intent with that was to provide flexibility for administration to figure out the best way to align our tenders to achieve those broader outcomes that we're seeking. And the reason why I rabbited on about this is because the second largest expense that we have as a city is the tenders that we do with our contractors. We spend a lot of time and resources through our staff trying to achieve particular outcomes and supporting our staff and finding people that are aligned to the vision that we have for the city, and including requirements in our tenders is a way to add value to the stuff that we're already doing in a similar way that we're doing with other things that we do around the place. It's also some of the cheapest way to do things as well, because just by purely asking questions, it prompts people and shifts organisations in the way they do that. We're not a Walmart or something like that, but Walmart did do this a number of years ago, and it was deemed to be one of the most significant things in the carbon space was them requiring their subcontractors to report their carbon emissions, and it then actually made people actually start to think about it. So if we can start to prompt our tenderers, if we can challenge them to see what they're doing about reconciliation, do they have a RAP? Are they thinking about their carbon footprint? Are they engaging with local businesses in our community? Are they encouraging their staff to ride to work? Whatever the case may be, then that's a really good opportunity to shift those tenders. And so that's why I go on about this stuff. And I recognise this is the start of a process, but it's something that we can start to do. It's also, we've got a lot of expertise within our own organisation that can provide that input, whether it's our sustainability team, our active transport officers, our policy and place managers. Those people can provide valuable inputs to how we go about doing our tender early on in the process as well. So that was just all I wanted to say on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Loden. Appreciate that. Seconded by Councillor Wallace. Does anyone wish to add any commentary? Councillor Gonchevsky.
Just a question. If council's only seeing these processes at the end, what mechanism does council have to ensure that the objectives that Councillor Loden has brilliantly espoused, and I could not agree more with, is actually come forward, given that we don't have involvement in the actual assessment, and getting information about that assessment can be somewhat challenging. I guess perhaps a question for you, CEO, or I guess any of the executive team in relation to further policy development that may be required to ensure that this is fleshed out a bit more, or whether sufficient direction is already contained within the current policy.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the council approved the updated purchasing policy, I think, in the last 12 months, which includes all the amendments which Councillor Loden referred to around the strategic community plan priorities, updates around Aboriginal procurement. I think we strengthened our language around sustainability and gender equity. And I think there's one other aspect which I've forgotten off the top of my head.
Can I just pose a question though? I mean, it's in the policy, but how do we get it into the criteria or into the weightings? Because it might be in the policy, but it's words on a page unless it's actually measured during the process. So I guess that's really, how does it transfer into the evaluation documentation?
Through Mayor Cole, some requirements, particularly around, well, I might get the director comment on this. Some of the responses wouldn't be compliant if they were in breach of any of our other policies. And we do have the sustainability criteria or an environmental criteria attached as well. And we're allowed to add qualitative weighting to bids which come in over and above a simple price tender.
Well, how can we ensure that that's included in the reporting that comes through council so we can see demonstration that that's occurring?
Through Mayor Cole, if you could clarify which particular bit, which particular weighting that you would like. Because
no, I'm just talking about, well, we have the policy, we've set the policy, which is our responsibility as a council, and then the implementation is the responsibility of administration. So it's not for me to sit here and say this particular bit of the policy. It's like we have the policy. How is that then implemented through the tender process, and how can that be demonstrated to council?
Yeah, through Mayor Cole, the one aspect which I missed was the strengthening the buy local aspect as well, which we've been implementing it. So all the tenders are evaluated against those priorities and the purchasing policy as updated by council. There might have been one tender, I think, where we didn't include the environmental criteria around the curbing, but I'll get the director to comment on that.
So through you, Michael, the simple answer is that the executive director, will sign off a procurement plan, and that's where we cross-check against the policy to make sure. It's fair to say what Councillor Loden referred to, which we're on a journey. We're still trying to accommodate some of those requirements, but that's why we're preparing a full answer in relation to all those different aspects of what the priorities are. So, but it's the procurement plan is the mechanism by which we sign off the procurement and how it's done, and the criteria reported in each report as well when we bring a tender to council. So,
for example, if we said when a tender document comes to council, we would like to see a new heading in each tender document saying demonstration of how this meets the procurement policy and these specific criteria. Is that how we would find that information more clearly? I'm just trying to translate it into the reporting to council to demonstrate that that's happened, to demonstrate that it's met the policy requirements.
yeah, so Michael, I think that's the bit that the procurement team are looking at, how we report some of that, because it definitely, some of the details are not included in the report, and we'd like to strengthen that. So probably the simple answer is that we could include it in the procurement plan and report in more detail of what those criteria are. So if I give you an example, gender equality is a compliance criteria, but we don't necessarily report that. So I think you just need to strengthen our reporting.
That would be good. It'd be good to get an idea of what that template that could be added into the report might look like, and perhaps even if it was circulated for some feedback from council members, if that's not too much of an ask. Yep. Okay. Any further comments or questions? Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Mako. It was really well spoken, Councillor Loden, and really summed up a lot of thoughts and feelings I had, but far less articulately. It was just a question to the CEO. I was wondering if it's, like we struggle to impact these tender review and approval processes at the end of it. And, I do find, as I've said before, like the evaluation process pretty opaque. And I'm wondering if like a more appropriate time for council input into this process is prior to the RFT going out. So, like we're presented with what the city wants to procure, we're presented with draft evaluation criteria, the questions that we want to ask. That allows us to kind of provide some input then and there, what we're actually looking for. And then we can kind of hand it over to the tender review panel to kind of make their decision and recommendations based on our articulated wants. So I guess I'm proposing tenders come twice to council now, which is doubling the administrative burden, I acknowledge, but I think would be a far more useful process. How do you feel about that, CEO?
Through Mercol, we can consider that. I'm not sure what the impact would be on operations because we only meet once a month for a council meeting. So we're rolling over and going out for contract renewals every month. So that would impact on our ability to renew these contracts without interrupting our suppliers.
It could also be something that could be discussed at the audit committee in terms of which way, is it through reporting? How do we ensure those policy requirements are implemented? That could be something that potentially could be discussed at audit committee.
Through MECO, yes, and also the quality of the management of the contracts is being scrutinised and improved through the rollout of a new contract management framework, which we're only 3 months into that rollout now. So that is bringing a higher degree of performance management of existing contracts, and then as they're renewed or we go out for new contracts for goods or services.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Does the city maintain, this question through you to the CEO, does the city maintain a register of tenders in a format that would be tenders, value and date of awarding and date of expiration? Does the city have that readily available?
Through Mayor Cole, yes. I'm not sure how far back it goes, but that we do have that.
As a thought bubble, not an amendment, certainly not to this, but perhaps that's something that could find its way into an agenda on an annual or biannual basis, so that existing tenders and those due for renewal, so that if there were specific things where perhaps people had a view on how the procurement policy might be interpreted, whether it be the specific skill set or what was likely coming up, that would then be in the public view in advance, rather than having to report monthly and coming back and trying to catch a tender, but to actually to know what's coming up, so that things that people, if there was a view either from the public or council to have a discussion at least about the procurement process, perhaps that's something that could be included, whether it be as quarterly or biannually in the information bulletin or similar, just, and perhaps even online as a register in our list of registers. That might be somewhere appropriate to keep it.
Through Mayor Cole, yes, and we are getting a consolidated database of all our contracts, which all have expiry dates together. That's not complete yet, but that is something we can make available.
Any further comments? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare it carried. Moving now to Community and Business Services. The next item is 11.2, advertising of amendments to community funding policy. Can I have a mover and seconder for this one, please? Moved by Councillor Loden, seconded by Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a follow-up conversation from questions from last week around allocation of funds, and provided some information through the bulletin, the briefing notes. So I'll throw some numbers here. So in 2020-21, where we expect to spend we spent 110,000 on connected communities, and thriving places, including the town team grants, was 130 out of a total of 280. So roughly 85% allocated to those two strategic community priority areas. From the cities, because I understand we didn't review the amounts or anything like that on each of those items, but are we comfortable that that is an appropriate allocation that we're getting between our different areas?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I suppose I have mentioned previously that we didn't really apply that lens. At the moment, the policy has been sort of aggregated on a process by process basis. And really, I'd be requesting guidance from council as to those priorities and whether or not we feel that is in the right mix. I've provided you the data in terms of how the policy is being applied and the application of that. But if council felt that the priorities needed to be rebalanced, then I could certainly come back with some recommendations or suggestions if I had some guidance from council.
Through Mayor Cole, it might help just to get a little bit more background on the intent of Councillor Loden's question. But just to make a comment, these small grants really have been focused on community development, small community groups. They're small scale, so they do lend themselves more to those two strategic community plan priorities. And as you'll see in the capital works program and the corporate business plan item later on, the other areas around transport and the environment have large capital works programs and expenditure listed against them, which would be hard to apply that level of expenditure to some of these smaller scale community initiatives.
So I guess if council was to form a view that we wanted that review to occur, would your preference be that we deferred this item or adopt it as is and request a report back on that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think our preference would definitely be to continue with the policy in its current format, and then if we decided to do a review, then amend the policy in that context, given the fact that it has been through a process of development and also community feedback. So I'd be reluctant to make late changes unless there was strong feeling from council that it was inappropriate.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just a final comment. The amount and the recipients in terms of the target areas can be adjusted by council each year through the annual budget cycle. We've just finished one, but we're just about to start another one. So we could take that on notice early in the preparation of next year's annual budget about how much in total should be allocated in these various areas, including around the relative balance for the different SCP priorities.
So to your point, CEO, so to my understanding, the policy will drive the quantum of money that's coming out of the different areas. If we decrease one area or increase another area, that's sort of like your lever to, like the budget would allocate money broadly to the bucket. So if there was 280K, that's the money that we've allocated to it. And then the policy that would then determine how that's allocated. So if we form the view that we wanted additional funds in one area, we could either reduce funds to certain grants and increase funds to other grants, or like you say, we could increase the total quantum that's allocated under the budget. But if we just increase the budget, wouldn't that just achieve the same sort of split? There'd just be more money available?
Through Mayor Cole, council could allocate grants or small grants in particular areas or new areas not already covered through the annual budget process, and we would have time over the next 9 to 10 months to see whether or not that required any amendment to the current policy. But if there was an area there which we weren't targeting, which was unmet, then we could take that on board early in the budget development process with council.
So I think the answer, if I'm hearing, is the preference is not to defer this, but if we wanted some form of review, then we should add an amendment on to request a review be undertaken by administration and a report come back to council around that. So I'm the mover, so if you could give me some appropriate words for that, and obviously I'll let others speak and move that and see where we get.
Can I just ask a question at this juncture though? I thought we had specific environmental grants, because I mean, there's one issue for me here is that this policy is kind of got, it's not, I understand what you're saying about the split of the SCP priorities, but in some ways this policy is a bit of a hobbling together of different needs within the community, and it's kind of, it is that community building type stuff that, and these things, but then you've got heritage assistant funds under here. Like it's a bit of a hodgepodge of things, but my understanding is that we have then separate environmental grants. So you'd have to actually have a much more holistic view rather than just looking at this policy. You'd actually have to say, under our environmental grants process, we spend X amount of money. This one here is kind of being the things that might not necessarily fit. Like there's some generic things here, but then there's also very specific things like heritage plaques, the active school grants, and now we've added trees of significance, which is a really good thing to see. But my understanding is that we have a separate process just for environmental grants. So rather than drilling down into this, you'd have to go broader. Is that correct on the environmental grants? I think Sarah Hill's totally across all of that.
Yes. So through you, McCall, you're correct. We do have small environment grants, which we give to community organisations. That is, yeah, something we do.
And through you, Mayor Cole, we could also certainly prepare a budget workshop paper for this round, which gives a more holistic view of all the grant funding going to particular areas under those categories. So that might be an opportunity to have that discussion with council to see that as a whole, not just the current grants listed under this policy.
Any further comments or questions? Councillor Toppelberg.
Since we're making general discussion about I guess, trying to rebox what is ultimately, to quote the Mayor, a hodgepodge of small community grants. I think the idea of then looking back at it and saying that the SCP needs to be broken up financially, because some of those SCP areas may well just be an expectation of advocacy from council, not necessarily allocation of budget, and understanding what local government's responsibility is to some of those areas. We may not well be able to save the planet by allocating certain amount of funding towards things, but may have a far greater role in terms of advocacy that may require less funding than making people feel good about where they live by expressing it through a different way that may require funding through these grants. So I think trying to put a different focus on it and divide the SCP up into dollars via this is, I think, a dangerous path, because I don't think it necessarily represents the way that those SCP priorities were presented to council. So I think to me, it's a completely separate body of work to look at how the SCP and the role of local government and what our responsibility is to those areas in our community, how that is expressed, and potentially how that is funded. But I think that in terms of some of it might be dollars, some of it might be time, some of it could be, there's other ways that we prioritise those different areas of the SCP. So I think that the point is valid in terms of looking at it, but I don't look at this policy as, and the allocation of those funds. I'd love to have a discussion about some of it and whether it's the business of local government to be funding it. That's a separate matter in some of those areas. But I think, I'll leave the comments at that, but I'm comfortable with the officer recommendation and the policy change. But I think it would be good to have a review, and maybe alongside the SCP review, we have a broader look at how that's expressed and prioritised, and whether allocation of time and resources may well be seen as, rather than a budget allocation, as being an appropriate elevation of certain elements of the SCP priorities.
Any further comments on the actual community funding policy? I think it's been a good discussion, but just bringing you back. Okay, I'll put the motion. Oh, sorry, you have a question?
I'll move an amendment then.
You want to wish to move an amendment?
Yes. Director, do you have some appropriate words? I can draft some if you like.
It's your amendment, come on.
Sure.
Take responsibility.
So hang on, let me just pull up.
I thought that's what you were doing.
And I was listening attentively to my colleagues' words. So it would be a new 4, I guess, which is requests that administration provide a report back to council as to how funds are allocated across SCP areas, including, and the intent there is to include all of those things, all of those parts that we're funding into the community. Does that adequately give intent there?
Through Mayor Cole, can I just clarify, would it be acceptable for Councillor Loden to be specific that this would form part of a budget workshop discussion? Because I think it would be broader, it's talking about allocation of resources during that annual budget process. So as opposed to a report to an OCM, it'd be easier to manage in that budget context.
I'm happy to come through the budget process.
Through you, Mayor Cole, if I could just make one small suggestion in the scoping of an amendment, that it goes to the heart of the policy's purpose, which is community groups, organisations. So it's looking at grants and sponsorship relating to community groups and community organisations, I think, something like that. As if I'm hearing the amendment correctly, it's sounding quite broad at the moment in terms of all SCP criteria across lots of different programs of work.
Yeah, so specifically for funds that we are providing to community organisations.
Correct.
Is there a seconder for the amendment? There's no seconder, so there is. You're saved by a last-minute hand in the air by Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. The money that we spend through our community groups is probably some of the most effective money that we spend in terms of delivering on outcomes for our community. And I think there's merit in looking at this a bit more closely and looking at how we allocate those funds to maximise the benefit that we can achieve for our community.
Councillor Wallace? Councillors?
I'll support this amendment, but I actually don't necessarily think it's needed. I think we just need to remember that we're going to do this, because unfortunately putting it in a council decision isn't necessarily a guarantee it's going to happen. So I think you need to make sure that you remember this, and I will as well, and we will have this discussion next budget round.
Councillors, can I just ask, is this, I'm quite supportive. I just want to understand, is this going to be an arduous task, or because we're just looking at community groups and organisations, and I know some will be split across various SCP priorities, but just give us a ballpark of resourcing required to look at this. Is this, if we're doing it as part of the budget process for next year, is this something that can just sort of be rolled in quite easily?
Mayor Cole, I believe that it can be. I think that we've probably got maybe 70% is captured in the scope of what we've presented relating to this policy already. And I think that there's some key categories that we can collect up. So I don't see it as an onerous task.
Good. Okay, happy to support it. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put Councillor Patakis. No, I'm putting the amendment. All those in favour? Carried. We're back to the substantive. Are there any further comments for those who haven't spoken? Going home feeling successful? We love your work, Councillor Loden. Okay, I'm putting the motion. All those in favour? I declare it carried. Okay, 11.5, adoption of corporate business plan 21-22 to 24-25 and 4-year capital works program 21-22 to 24-25. Absolute majority decision is required. Moved by Councillor Toppelberg, seconded by Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I've got some questions in relation to the workforce profile. So it appears on page 283 of the document, the total document. I'm not sure what page the attachment it is because I've got the whole item downloaded. Just some numbers. So it won't prejudice my approval or my vote for it, but just some, I suppose, things to note. Human resources, 7.2 FTE equivalent, and its budget spend of 1,185,000. It seems to be, I'd be interested to see a breakdown of that 7.2 equivalent and whether I understand, for example, in the CEO and executive management, that some of those numbers are skewed by a number of higher paid employees, but there seems to be with 7.2 FTE in the human resources section, 1,185,000. But if you take, and I guess I'll make this as just as a comment, so I'd like to get some more data around that, but if you look at the breadth of what we do as an organisation and the volume of people that we have on the ground, and particularly in the outside workforce, that it's a fairly broad cross section. You would presume both of skill sets and pay levels, but a rudimentary calculation pops out at significantly over $108,000 as the average across FTEs in terms of what we are spending on workforce. I know we conducted a benchmarking exercise, but I'd be interested to see if you take those numbers as they're presented. For example, I was surprised to see that we're spending more than $3 million on our workforce in ranges for under 30 FTE, which means an average across that work area of more than $100,000 a year. I would have thought there would have been a number of employees sitting over that and a number of employees sitting under that. So they're just comments or observations, I suppose, but it's not dissimilar if you go through marketing, again, average of more than $100,000 a year per FTE. So some of these areas where I think there would be a broad variety of people at different stages in career and expertise and would receive vastly different levels of remuneration. The averages seem to pop out above I would guess that it would be a snapshot of society, would be our local government, and to be something like 40 or 50 or nearly 50% over the average wage nationally as the average wage within Vincent. I think that that's something that we could have a closer look at going forward. And so as that workforce profile and plan of the FTEs evolves, taking that back then to the work that's being done. And I think that whilst it's a complex document and it's different people have different ways of liking to read liking this sort of information presented. And I think once you've got your head around it, it's the information's all there. It's just how people like to package it up and see it. But I guess just flagging that it's something that I think we need to watch collectively, administration and council, that the numbers that are there, and as I say, I understand we went through a benchmarking exercise, but the staff retention rates and how that relates directly to salary in particular, but to those numbers, I think that it reads as quite high to me for an organisation of the size and complexity and the diversity that we have in job roles. And that's something that I would like to see explored as this, over the budget process for the coming years. And I'll reserve my comments as that. Thank you.
Councillor Hallett, was it you? Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just the general comment of we have a very exciting and ambitious capital works agenda ahead of us, which is great to see. I did just want to ask a couple of questions through you, Mayor, to, I guess, the Executive Director, but possibly others because it relates to different areas. But I just wanted to understand a little bit more about the community engagement column within the capital works program and how that was arrived at in terms of the different levels of community engagement in there for different activity. And kind of as part of that, if we could find out a little bit about where the community engagement framework is within the organisation and to what extent that's being rolled out and informing decisions about community engagement levels.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I can perhaps start with an answer to that, and then we'll see if my colleagues got anything to add. But in terms of the community engagement framework, I think it has been very well understood and socialised within the organisation that we have it in place and that it is an important part of what we do. I think we're now in the process of embedding it and making this operational. And so there's very much a learning process that we're going through at the moment. The marketing team are sort of taking the lead in terms of the tools and the, I suppose, championing those opportunities to drive community engagement as projects come through and as teams are leading various things. In terms of the columns that are there, I do see that as I think we've made an attempt to commence the process of breaking these very detailed document down into and align it to our community engagement intentions. I believe that this needs to be something that we will work on and improve over time because, and certainly as we're rolling this out, we are building into our mechanisms some very regular reviews and updates and improvements because this is a new skill set for the organisation, and I'm sure that we will learn and adapt as we move along. So I think I've had some feedback from other elected members that perhaps certain line items could have been flagged differently, and I take that on board. There was a cross-functional group that pulled that table together. But I would be hesitant to say it's 100% correct. I think we are definitely now in a learning process, and as we're implementing it, we will get more sophisticated.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to add to that regarding the community engagement framework and that learning process, I suppose that what you see in that column relates directly to the IAP2 framework. And that's obviously what we have discussed regarding what the community engagement strategy and policy will be based upon. That is due to come to council next month for approval following the advertising period. So I suppose building on the learning and that this is a start due to the fact that that strategy and policy is yet to be finalised, but we wanted to start embedding that type of language and that type of thought process within the organisation. Also building on that's been done through a focus group that's been convened throughout the organisation to start making sure that across the organisation there's the understanding of that spectrum and how it's going to be used through the policy and strategy, so that we have started some of that work ahead of the actual policy and strategy being in place, so that we understand whether that was the right approach.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just a final comment on that. What the document does for the first time, and it's a 4-year capital works program, is essentially gives a guide of where staff should start in terms of the spectrum. But because it is a spectrum, once you get into a project, you might find out more, and you can move up or down that spectrum as well, that you may want to go further into the engagement process, or there may be universal acceptance and support for what is being proposed, and then it can drop back down a notch. So it can go, it can move during the life of a project in response to feedback and the changing nature of a particular program or project that's underway. So some of those projects, it's hard to predict 4 years out the level of community interest or support for particular things, but as you get closer to implementing something, you can always change where you want to land on that spectrum between inform and consult and engage and empower.
Sure, I think there is something about a level of intent to consult at the beginning, and you might pare back, but you should be aiming for more than less. Just to follow up to that though, community engagement framework aside, just wondering in terms of the eco-zoning programs and the choice of saying consulting is not applicable despite there being a council resolution about that. Just wondering if that was intentional.
Through my colleague, I can answer that. That's an error. I picked that up this afternoon as well. For example, Monmouth Street, with consultations already being prepared and happening, so that is just an error that we need to correct. We're aware of the council decision aside from the framework as well, so apologies for that.
Can we just amend that though? I think that needs to be amended. Yeah.
Thank you. Nothing further, just I'm aware that there's an amendment that may be proposed and I'm supportive of those changes.
Thank you, Councillor Hillett. Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I think at this stage I'll just move an amendment to the Capital Works program that aims to clarify and change some of the community engagement levels. It's a bit complicated. I have emailed it to council members, my marked up version and the wording of the amendment. And Wendy, I think I emailed it to you too. I just wanted to, yes, and if I get a second, I'll speak to it.
Seconded by Councillor Hillett.
Thank you. I just wanted to amend some of the community engagement levels. As I've foreshadowed, I think this is a useful tool for council and community and administration to ensure we're all on the same page here. I wanted to just speak about consultation. There are certain elements here, including in the red item 4 within this proposed amendment that is talking about the black spot works. And I just wanted to clarify that my intention in relation to this is not that where we've identified a where we have identified an issue related to community safety and we have received black spot funding, that we would consult on whether or not we undertook an intervention in a particular space, that the consultation would be around how the intervention is implemented to seek community feedback and the experience of the surrounding residents around the how we're choosing to implement. And I note that there've been my understanding of intervening road treatments has changed since I've been on council, and a lot of that has been getting feedback from community around elements like cyclist and pedestrian safety, around treatments that are aimed at changing car behaviour. And I think that that's something that when we're thinking and designing things to change cars, it can be very challenging to also have cyclist and pedestrian safety as front of mind. So I do think it's important that we do consult, but it isn't necessarily to say we've recognised there's a safety issue here. Do you think we should do something about it? It's a different sort of consultation. I also wanted to speak to, there's an element in there that talks about implementing key outcomes of the public open space strategy. But I'll just ask a question on this one, because I've been advised today that perhaps that descriptor is actually incorrect and that they're not really key outcomes. It's more just like minor works in public open space. I had intended to change it to consulting, because if we're implementing key outcomes of a strategy, I would think we would consult. But if the descriptor is incorrect and it's not actually key outcomes or any significant outcomes, that may not be appropriate. But if I could just perhaps request some clarification from the Executive Director.
Yeah, through you, Nicole. I think there's a modest budget of 50,000. I know that's quite a large amount, but it's not for one thing. It's for a series of small things that are required in relation to the POS strategy. So I wouldn't say there are key outcomes, things like signage, etc. So a series of small items rather than one significant. So that makes it quite difficult to consult. So if we are renewing a sign in a park, you know, that's and a number of those, then it would be difficult to consult, I think, on those.
Well, I think that would come under the park signage renewal item that I don't believe has a consult element. So is there another example that I can be provided with?
Through you, Nicole, I'll need to take that on notice to actually go back and look at the what the work schedule was.
Could you maybe potentially just take the part in red and make it a little bit broader to say that where there are key outcomes, rather than it specifically being text from the document?
Procedurally, am I able to just amend that amendment so that it is adding the word consult/inform as appropriate, rather than...
With the support of the seconder, I'm happy for that to happen. The seconder supports that.
Yes, thank you. I'd be happy to change this so that it is, it adds in relation to this particular item, it actually doesn't change the community engagement level from inform to consult. So we'd need to probably remove that from there and just say, yeah. I just add...
I think you need a B.
Yeah, I think that needs to become B. So VII needs to become, needs to be removed from that element of the list. And then it would become B. I don't actually have the wording in front of me. Yeah.
Can't you simply use the same word and say public open space strategy implementation for the implementation of key outcomes?
Yeah, I think it would be to just add a consult as appropriate to that item. So, consult as appropriate.
Wendy, if you remove that whole point 7 and put it underneath the entire amendment as a new clause B.
Oh,
No,
yeah,
does
it's
it?
not B, it's like D or E or...
Whatever letter comes next, there you go. Okay, and is that endorsed? That's in just clarifying, Councillor Hallett, you've endorsed that change to the amendment?
And then I think that the Britannia floodlight works has already been consulted upon. So it says to amend that to consult, which I think is in line with what has happened. But my understanding is, and I'll get some clarification, that consultation has already occurred, and that what would subsequently happen, as the CEO has said, is that there may be some information going out to park users, etc., when the works are going to be completed, but that would be an informed activity. But the consultation has already occurred.
Yes, McCall, that's correct. The community engagement has been done. We're on a tight time scale because of the grant funding. Project needs to be completed by December. And you're also correct that we would notify people when the works were going to go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I think the amendment still stands in that it changes from inform to consult, but it is ultimately not seeking to change the consultation, require another round of consultation. It's just that when we're doing things like large-scale lighting installations at local parks, some level of consultation would be appropriate with the community, and I think that that would be left there. So I'm happy to leave that section of the amendment as is. And I don't really have anything else to say except that I think that this provides more clarity, and I think that, I've seen recently in my own local open space that, improved engagement around engagement with park users, and I think that that's great to see, and hopefully that this can be a way that we can all ensure that that is an ongoing process of improvement.
Councillor Hallett, do you wish to speak to the amendment as the seconder?
Thank you. Yes, very supportive of this. I think just to state that in terms of developing the engagement framework and where that's gone, this provides both clarity and probably, I guess, another signal of council's intent, if it's passed, of the depth of engagement that we're looking for across the projects, and perhaps that's useful generally for administration as well.
Thank you, Councillor Hallett. Do other councillors wish to comment on the amendment? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? I declare it carried. We're back to the substantive. I also prepared an amendment earlier. I can't move it, but I did prepare it. Councillor Gontaszewski.
Yes, can I please move the amendment that has been circulated from Mayor Cole? Has this gone to councillors? Okay. I'm going to email you now.
Are we ever having our screens back? I know I raise this a lot, but I can't read that from here. And Virginia helped me, but I, effectively wrote it and can't read what it says. It basically just no, I can't talk to it because I'm not moving it. Do you want to read it out?
I'll move it, yeah. It just makes some amendments to strategic focus areas.
So this is just to be clear, the corporate business plan, not
yes,
the capital
to the corporate
works
business
program.
plan. includes the addition of streamlining character area process and progressing nominations is added to the service deliverable areas for policy, or it should be policy in place, I think. So if I could get the, yeah. Yep. And that we're adding ensuring through design review that development standards are high quality and sensitive to their location is added to the service area deliverables for development and design. And continuous review of glyphosate. Glyphosate? Am I spelling that correctly? Saying glyphosate? That is correct. Thank you. An improvement in use of alternatives is added to the service area deliverables for parks, and delivering and implementing the communications plan is added to the service area deliverables for marketing. And I think that we've ultimately got a corporate business plan that is an evolving document. Wait, do I have a seconder? Sorry, before I start speaking. Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Hallett, seconding again.
This is just some minor changes to the document to capture some additional activities. Whilst I think that the CBP is an evolving document, and I do really, really love a capital works program as a detailed guide for the capital works that we're undertaking a particular year, I think that this again is in, you know, where we have perhaps more of a work in progress is around reducing or increasing transparency around operational activities for both council and community. And I think that this amendment seeks to perhaps bring forward and highlight some of those key pieces of work that are going to be delivered and will and also, I guess, or are still being delivered at present. And I think that that's beneficial for clarity and transparency and accountability to our community.
Councillor Hallett.
Yes, very happy to support this. I think it's useful to highlight, there's a couple of these in particular that have had a lot of community concern, appetite raised with us. So I think it's useful to highlight those more clearly.
Councillors. Yes, I mean, often we're told the CBP outlines everything that the city does, but I think every time I look at it, I think of more things that aren't in there. And just one example is that, you know, sensitive design is one of our SCP priorities, and there wasn't actually anything about that under our development and design area. So that was a bit interesting. And there's probably more, but this is where I got to for this particular amendment. So just trying to make sure, as Councillor Gontaszewski says, that some of those key things are captured. I'm still not completely convinced that having the table up front and then not having those key, I appreciate very much the changes that have been made and that the lead service area has been included in that table. But I think if you're flicking through the document and you're looking at the service areas, and it is a long document and there's a lot going on, it's almost like it needs to be said, needs to be read in conjunction with, so every time I go to look for it, I get lost. Because this table, strategic projects, is actually extremely important. So I haven't got it as part of the amendment, but CEO, I know that you're open to doing edits, and I wondered whether it could even say that, you know, under every service agreement, this needs to be read in conjunction with the strategic projects on page, whatever the page is going to be, because they do really need to be read together. And if someone was flicking through and just looking at a service area and not seeing some of those key projects under there, that could be a problem as well. Anyway, please support my amendment. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare it carried. We're back to the substantive. Are there any further? Councillor Gontaszewski?
I have another amendment, but I have a question first.
Sure.
Actually, no, I'm just going to move it. I just want to amend page 23 so that we're not saying that we're preparing an accessible city strategy and allocating like hundreds of thousands of dollars to it, because we've already done it and like we're getting on with it. So yeah, if I can get a seconder, that will be my amendment.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Fotakis is seconding.
I'm just going to go to the correct page. It's in our strategic.
Page 23 of the attachment.
Oh yeah, I think I'm on the individual report, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Is it, am I allowed to use? No, I don't know if I'm allowed to use that reference, am I? Okay, so I need to.
You could say amend the strategic projects item number 7.1.
Yeah. To 286. Okay, so to amend the strategic project description for item 7.1 of on page 286 of the agenda. So we're going to delete the words prepare and insert the words implement the. So that would make the description say, implement the accessible city strategy to guide future movement within the city.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think it's prepare an, just an extra little word in there. It's prepare an. Yep, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Gontaszewski. Seconded by Councillor Fotakis. Is there any discussion? I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? Declare that carried. Can I just also ask a question? Because when I look at asset management and sustainability, I guess we are still developing, aren't we? We're still in a development phase, yes. We are. I'll just answer my own question. Just move on. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put the entire motion as amended. All those in favour? I declare that carried. Next on the agenda, we're moving to Chief Executive Officer items. 12.1, proposed lease to Robertson Park Artist Studio. Moved by Councillor Fotakis, seconded by Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor. Been involved with this group since I've been on council. And I was surprised when we looked at going through this lease to see a special condition here talking about redevelopment and demolition, and it's not a nice surprise to actually receive when you start talking about demolitions of buildings when we're talking about a lease. So I did have some concerns about that, and it did cast my memory back, and there's another item that I'll speak to later in the meeting. But there was a meeting that we held at Florida Athena grounds many months ago, where we turned up to a meeting with community members and members of the Florida Athena Club, and we're talking about the old turnstile building, and out of the blue comes the discussion about the possible demolition of this building. And now tonight on the within the information bulletin, we're actually talking about a lease going to Transition Town Vincent for their wonderful tool library. So one of the things that does concern me about this is we're talking about a demolition of a building within the framework of a lease within a building, within an area where we've had a development plan that's gone out for community consultation that did not include this particular building. So we've gone out and consulted with the community about the future of Robinson Park and what they would like to see there. This building, under the request of staff, wasn't included as part of that discussion. Let me just go back to my notes on that. So there's a couple of the issues that I did have a concern about. All right. The arts plan does speak to creating a thriving and professional arts scene that is supported and ever developing. And I think part of that is looking more longer term with the group. So while I'm supportive overall of most of really what's contained within the officer's recommendations, I will be proposing an amendment later on, given my rights as the mover to actually speak to and close the debate. But the Robinson Park Art Studio has a long history with us, and it's not only in providing that co-working spaces for artists, it's been a place for small exhibitions and community classes, and it's been an important sort of support for mentoring for aspiring and emerging artists. And when you actually talk to a lot of artists who've lived and worked in the area and been through their training through university, it's amazing how many times that the Robinson Park, sort of like the art studio, comes up in conversation that it formed a really essential part of their growth and development as they move forward to the professional development as an artist. And even within, you know, a shocking year last year for the arts community, we still saw the Studio of Artists do a collaboration with Starla Contemporary, which is one of our galleries in the Pickle District, for a joint exhibition. And they also put themselves forward to actually run some live art classes as part of Pride Month, when Pride was thrown into disarray with the cancellation of their public events and looking to supplement that. So they do and perform a very essential function within the community. There's just a couple of aspects of this. Like I said, I'll be looking to actually move an amendment later on.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions in relation to language. And so just some of the things that have been, and some of it's been written in response to the amendment that's been proposed on the Kermit Green. That's not yet been moved. So the terms management of the building, my understanding is, so the management of the building, if the building has a lease, then the management of it is, I guess, I'm trying to get an understanding of what the officers or the administration's comments are that says that retain the ability for the city to take back management of the building. If there's a lease, then our management role of the building itself is as the owner of the building. We have a leasehold which relates to the occupancy of the building. And if there's a structural or safety issue as the owner of the building, I'll talk about local governments, or ask about local government's role in that separately, but as the owner of the building, the ability, where it's written, the ability to take back management of the building in the event of a structural or safety issue, my understanding is that if we are the owner of the building and a tenant has a structural or safety issue, the obligation falls on the owner of the building to make it so that they are entitled to their quiet enjoyment. Is that correct?
Through Mayor Cole, yes, that's correct. That sentence is in response to, of course, the amendment, which we're not yet discussing, but basically if we were to remove that.
Let's talk about in terms of the clause that's proposed. So clause A, which says redevelopment of the premises. I understand a redevelopment clause. So if the city determines it can no longer maintain the premises in a safe and occupiable condition, the city may, upon providing the tenant with a minimum of 12 months notice, require the tenant to surrender its lease of the premises. That is quite different to if there's a structural issue with it. The idea of taking back management or other. My understanding is if you have a lease agreement, whether it's on day one or day, as is proposed here, 729 of what was what proposed as a 2-year lease, the obligation falls on the landowner. And in the event that there is a structural issue, if we weren't the owner of the building, someone else was, in fact, the city would be called and go and put a building notice to require the owner to make the building structurally sound. Would that not be correct?
Through Mayor Cole, yes, that would be correct. However, in this proposed lease terms, there is that provision proposed, which does give the city the ability as the landowner to take back the property with 12 months notice if we determine that we can't maintain it in that safe manner. So it's worded specifically for that purpose. There's another section of the terms that say the city is responsible for capital renewal and upgrade of existing assets at the city's sole discretion as well. So most of these terms have been written understanding the age of the building and the current condition of the building. So there isn't an expectation that, if something were to go drastically wrong, that the city would suddenly be able to replace the entire building, say, or replace some walls of the building if there was an issue structurally.
Okay, so condition, proposed condition, where are we? So the redevelopment condition, which is currently 2.12 part A and B. That's if somebody is occupying the premise, if this is approved as recommended, someone's occupying the building, hears a noise that they think is strange, a structural engineer goes out and says there's an issue with the roof. Under this proposed condition, the city would not lock the door. I'm like, there's a structural issue, but there's also the 12 months notice. If the issue is that the city decides, I'm curious as to what happens in that 12 months for the artist who's leased a studio. If we're going to say, here's your 12 months notice, and by the way, you can't come in either because we're not prepared to spend the money to fix it. So the 12-month clause that's proposed here is effectively useless. Just clarifying that that's the case.
Through Mayor Cole, it wouldn't be on the determination of some kind of emergency. If there was an emergency, then we'd close the building straight away and reach a further agreement with the tenant, because that isn't set out specifically in the lease, that situation. This is more about once we've finished our asset management strategy, we've got our asset management plans in place, we know what we want to do with the building, and we've made that decision, might be at the end of year 1 or year 3, then we can say to the tenant, okay, we're either going to renew the building or we're going to make some certain upgrades or demolish it. That's what needs 12 months notice.
That's understood. So I guess that's back to and I know the amendment hasn't been moved, but that's different to what's given as the administration comments, which is effectively if there's a structural or safety issue, we want to reserve the right to end the lease, which is not what's reflected in the current proposed conditions. So that's 2 different points of view. But I guess, so I'll talk generally to it and we'll await the amendment. So I think that there's a critical element that we as a city and as council have missed, which is the opportunities that the Robertson Park plan presented. To have not consulted on Halverson Hall in particular was a missed opportunity. And I think if you look at some of the language that's sort of crept in this recommendation, so my personal view is that there is an intrinsic link between the existence of Halverson Hall, the artist, and what that can provide for community. I have and I've expressed this to some of the artists, I have an issue with the level of public engagement and ability, whilst they do run some classes and otherwise some of them are quite cost prohibitive, so that the ability of Halverson Hall to provide a more public arts element within the city is absolutely unique. I think that there's very few public spaces that have that type of working artist studio within them that are accessible to community. And I think that there's some work that can and should be done on that side of it. But I suppose the prevalence of things like the ageing asset, the ability, looking at potential redevelopment or demolition, those are things that haven't been discussed other than in a broad sense of ageing assets and how we deal with them as a community. But I think, or how we deal with them as a council, I think that the lumping of Halverson Hall into the ageing asset, and there's no money on budget, so at some point it either needs to get, it is likely to get demolished or redeveloped, but that requires a decision, is a completely separate matter to the value that the community places on having Halverson Hall as an artist studio. So I'm supportive of the continuation of it as an artist studio. I'm supportive of allocation of appropriate budget to make sure that Halverson Hall or something similar continues to provide artist space, but I'm equally keen to see whether it be through this lease or going forward, and through a consultation process that makes sure that my reading of community is correct, that we work out ways to ensure that the ongoing use of it as a working studio and the value that the artist, and there's, whether it be equipment or that, I understand there are some issues with accessibility in terms of security and safety and other things as well. You can't just have, tens of thousands of dollars worth of your equipment sitting in there and letting people wander in all day. But the idea of also at a relatively small cost, giving a significant public asset to a small number of artists, that to me is the key question of how we manage Halverson Hall. But I think there's too much language. Again, I'll wait for the amendment. There's too much language that points towards the asset of the building and its potential for demolition or repurposing, as that's our asset management issue, and it presupposes, or I guess the lease kind of ignores the high value that an artist studio within a local reserve provides to community. So I'll leave my comments at that, and we'll await the amendment, which is the right of of Councillor Fatagas who had raised it. But I'll leave my comments at that.
Councillors, Councillor Konchevsky.
Yes, I was quite concerned as well in relation to the way that the issues of the state of this building have come to council's attention. I think that there would have absolutely been opportunity to consider this building as part of the development plan. However, administration recommended that it not be included in the scope of the development plan, and along with the cottage and the fountain. And my recollection of the questioning of that recommendation was that there was currently no triggers for including them for consideration, in terms of nothing that would warrant a change in the council's position in relation to those three elements of the park. And so I find it then odd that when we're considering a lease, that this is how that information is surfaced to council. I am concerned that we have a non-compliant switchboard and in relation to, but no plan to in the CBP to fix that switchboard. May I just get some clarification in relation to that, as to what sort of risk that poses to the city, and how that risk is mitigated. I'm aware that we have had other areas where those particular components have been non-compliant, but we fixed a lot of them, and I'm just wondering why we don't have a plan to fix this one.
Through you, McCall, I don't know the detail about the switchboard, so I would have to take that one on notice.
I'll just ask a general question then around switchboards. As to, I also note that it talks about the toilets not being compliant, and is it the same sort of thing as, where if they're non-compliant but they're in situ and they're not broken, that there's no compulsion, like it's not a safety issue per se that warrants immediate attention, but if you're doing other works, you're required to bring them to standard?
Yes, through you, McCall. So I think that's correct. They were built to a standard of the time, and the trigger to bring them to modern standards is when we make significant change. So I mean, I need to check the detail, but if it was a safety issue, like a serious safety issue, we would deal with it irrespective of the trigger. But I need to check the detail to be able to answer the question fully.
Okay, thank you. I probably should just say that I'm supportive of the item. I'm definitely supportive of continuation of the lease. I struggle to, being a process girl, I struggle to think about how council and administration and community can develop a shared vision for things like Halverson Hall and then actually fund that vision if it's not through things like development plans. And so when something is recommended as not being included in the scope of a development plan because there's no trigger to include it in there, the way that I take that is that it is it is council's decision and it is the community's understanding that the asset will be retained. Whilst council has demolished some buildings, they have to date been buildings that have not been used. My understanding is that this building has been continuously used, is used today. And from the commentary in relation to the feedback received through the engagement around the Robertson Park development plan, there has been interest in discussing the cottage in terms of its maintenance and bringing it up to scratch. But also ultimately, the view of the community that has been espoused so far is that it should be retained. And so I don't know how. And I'll also say that we have a property management framework, and whilst I understand that leases of a commercial nature are, capital works are by the cities at the city's discretion. I also don't feel that that the obligations of the city are necessarily the city's vision for this building are being reflected through the execution of the property management framework in this instance. So I'm concerned about that. So I think that I will also say that we've got an asset management strategy that's not finalised yet, that we've been waiting for sometimes and is in a complex, potentially, body of work. But that we can't just sit on our hands and not do the things that we are either obligated to do or are in complete alignment with our existing position whilst we're waiting for certain documents to be finalised. So I'm supportive of the lease. I'll be supportive of a recommendation coming forward to amend it in relation to time frame, and I would also be whilst I don't usually like tying things up, I think that we need to provide some direction to administration in relation to actually assessing the costs of the work to bring the building to a point where it is at a Vincent standard, and then putting that into our long-term financial planning. May I just ask what that body of work might look like and what time frame would be required for that body of work to be undertaken? I'm not talking detailed design, I'm talking preliminary assessment.
Through Mayor Cole, as briefly mentioned before, and as you touched on, Councillor Gontaszewski, about the asset management and sustainability strategy, once that is finalised, or it will potentially contain an action, has an action in the draft about preparing asset prioritisation plans for our buildings. So this would apply across all of the city's buildings and give us more of a holistic view, not just in terms of demolition, but renewal, upgrades, rationalisation as well. So that's going to be one of the highest priority parts of the strategy. And we'd be looking to do that in the short term, like within the first 1 to 3 years of adopting the strategy. So hence the amendment would line up quite well with that as well.
That wasn't the question that I asked. So if you could just answer the question that I've asked, I'd be very grateful.
Sorry, I thought it was just around the timing of assessing the building?
So what I've asked is how long it would take to do an assessment of the works that would be required to bring that building to a Vincent standard. Not detailed design, but just an understanding, because we've received conflicting information in the briefing notes. One says that the building is structurally okay, and the other one says that it's, poor condition. So one talks about fit out, and then there's also the issue of toilets and switchboard and so on. And so I would like to know how long it would take to actually gather that information as to what exactly is required in this building and what some indicative high-level costs would be that could be incorporated into long-term financial planning documents when they're considered by council.
Yeah, so you might call. I think we need a few months. We could do it this side of the beginning of the budget process for next year, I think. So we could do it this side of Christmas. It would be high level. We won't get into detail. If I expand on the answer about structurally okay, etc. Well, I think the building structurally, actually the external fabric of the building is fine, but the fit out is very, very old, and that's what the commentary is trying to describe, really, that the building will continue to stand, but internally the facility, the fit out is not the standard we would expect, and the toilets is a good example where they don't meet any form of current standards in terms of accessibility, and the electrics are old, etc. So it's about the fit out. Structurally, building will stand, but it's the inside, I think. I mean, typically some of these buildings we are spending, well, if I give you a guide to do toilets and kitchens, etc. The ones we've done the last few years are $250,000 to bring up to a modern standard. So that would sort of give you a guideline amount. And I think the concern about giving a longer lease is that it doesn't give council any scope to make a decision if the lease is too long about doing some of those works that may be required sooner rather than later.
When we do lease renewals to buildings that have an existing lease, do we terminate the lease or do we just negotiate with the lessee in relation to undertaking works while they are in situ and quietly enjoying the premises?
Yeah, so we might call it does depend on the works. I mean, we've had tenants quite recently, we've moved out because of the safety issue. It allows time to investigate and find a solution. The solution was an inexpensive one, so we did the works asbestos related and moved them back in fairly quickly. I think the fear would be that the solution would not be cheap. We'd find something and the solution wasn't a cheap, simple solution. And as the landlord, we were compelled to do those works. We had no wriggle room to make a decision about whether we spent a substantial amount of money to a building that is not in great condition. So I think that's the fear, is not having that flexibility to make that decision. We're a landlord, we have a tenant, quiet enjoyment, we're compelled to do the works and they could be substantial cost. I think that's the fear from the buildings team.
Okay, so there's no money in the corporate business plan to do any of these works and the lease term is currently 4 years. So if we've just adopted a corporate business plan that doesn't say we're doing these works and the lease that's being proposed says that any works are at our discretion, anyway, that doesn't matter. How will administration bring forward a long-term financial plan for adoption by council that doesn't leave the city and its ratepayers and a whole bunch of, and the administration in a black hole in relation to finances in terms of the management of our long-term, our building assets? How can we bring forward a long-term financial plan if we aren't planning on spending any money on buildings? I'm struggling. I guess I'm struggling. I want to understand the relationship between these corporate documents as part of the planning and reporting framework, and what we actually need to do out there on the ground, so that those things speak to each other and are meaningful. And I guess I'm just wondering, in terms of what I've just been told, is to understand the works that need to be done to a building that we're about to sign a lease of some duration for, where administration has identified it is in poor condition and has also recommended that it be excluded from long-term future planning for the site, which I think would be the vehicle that would be required to make a decision around continuation or removal of a building. I've been told that we're going to adopt a long-term financial plan. I think it's November now, but that I can't get this information on significant capital works expenditure around a building until next year for the budget cycle. If the intention of the long-term financial planning is so that we're not just making decisions year on year in a budget, that we're actually planning for our future and ensuring that we've got funds set aside, and we can talk to our community about this, how does that sort of length of time to obtain that information for one building, how can we adopt a long-term financial plan in November if we don't have that sort of information? And what is the plan to get it?
Through you, Michael. So the simple answer is the vehicle is the asset management strategy. And I think the context is not this building. We have many buildings that are not in great condition, need substantial amounts of work, need fit out, etc. So the context is not this building in isolation, it's our entire building stock. I take the point up with the LTFP. Council will approve one prior to this work being done. The action is contained currently in the draft strategy, but let's assume it will get approved and we will do the work. And what that means is that the next LTFP will reflect Council's decision around its entire building stock, if that answers the question. We are currently in a holding pattern. This is why we're recommending no major works to this building until that work is done. And it's not this building that's the issue. It's the context is all our building stock, where we have many demands and an asset gap, from a long time, I think. So the context is the whole building stock. So if you take the sequence of events, we can prepare something about this building for you. But it's how much value that's worth to Council without doing it for every single building, which is an action in the asset management strategy.
What would you call the name of the body of work that you would prepare for this building?
Well, through Michael, the wording from the asset management strategy is we prepare an asset prioritisation plan for buildings.
I'm not asking about that. I'm asking about what you would call a body of work that you would do to prepare. Would the wording prepare an assessment of the building compliance and alignment with, I don't know, I'm sort of seeking some, because prioritisation essentially means ranking things.
Yep.
But you're going to rank them on something. So what are you going to gather for all of the city's buildings that would allow that prioritisation to occur?
So I would be a building inspection, which would determine the condition of the building and the works required with an estimate for those
Can
works.
I just jump in, because this is did we not do the lycopodium assessment of all of the buildings? Surely we have the components that we know are needing to be repaired. It shouldn't have to be a starting from ground zero. My understanding is that information is there for all of the city's buildings through that lycopodium body of work.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I can confirm that there is actually schedules that have been created by Lycopodium. The date of effect was 2017, but we've used that to sort of baseline a lot of our asset management. So on a property by property basis, there's actually a condition assessment, and also it goes down to a level of detail in terms of the roof is in this condition and it's likely to deteriorate at this level. The level of depreciation is this. So, the interior will depreciate at this level. So there's actually quite a bit of detail from a financial perspective. And the layers of that have been aggregated to create some high level assumptions that are fed into the LTFP. So just to confirm what I'm hearing as an emerging concern is there is actually a broad provision, particularly for years 5 through to 10, where we have got a guesstimate, if you like, but it's formed with some fairly good analysis behind it. But what I am imagining that the asset management strategy is going to do is add a whole other level of certainty and specificity around that. So, and we will tighten up those projections on a property by property basis as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. That is really useful. And I do understand that one of the issues that we're yet to tackle that will come out of the asset management strategy is what exactly is the Vincent standard for these buildings? And which Vincent standard applies to which type of building, etc. However, I'm unwilling to sit on my hands for 1 to 3 years. I do appreciate that it's a significant body of work. And given that this has been raised through a lease document, I'm happy to tack an amendment onto the bottom of this recommendation to require the CEO to present a condition and compliance assessment and high level costings for renewal and / upgrade of facilities at Halverson Hall.
Can I get a seconder for the amendment, seconded by Councillor Toppelberg?
And given that we're coming from a not a zero base, and this item did come to this agenda and there was questions asked about it at the briefing, I think that we should be aiming to have that information in time to consider for the long-term financial plan. So I think that I actually should put a date of November 2021.
Is that date acceptable to you as the seconder, Councillor Toppelberg?
It is, yeah, I'll speak to the amendment, but yes, it is.
Do you wish to speak to it? Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. I think I guess this is using Halverson Hall as a case study. I mean, ultimately what we're talking about is a lease, and the idea that considering what we had, and I understand that the data goes back years for Lycopodium, but I've gotten as far in my 3 minutes of looking to see that it was building number 41 and it's in category 6, community and sporting clubs. I just can't find the actual budget workshop stuff but I'm sure there's a number attached to it, so some of that information should be more readily available. I guess the issue for me is that it's not dissimilar, I suppose, to some of the discussions that we had before about how we structure tenders. And so at what point do we check in with council or community? Because if the question was asked, is having an artist centre or an artist studio within a structure within Robertson Park a critical element of how people view the future of Robertson Park, and attach that to what are the expectations and what are the facilities that need to be provided, that may well be something that could go in some way to the public sector, the private sector, or otherwise to be able to create something, as opposed to compliant toilets are going to cost this much. So if we attach them on, and ultimately Halverson Hall may then be, depending on which way you look at it, enshrined or condemned to being a place for 4 small artist studios within a small box for the rest of its days, and that may or may not be in line with community's long-term desire for the building. So I think I'm interested in what those numbers come back at, because I think we should be able to access that information quickly in line with Councillor Gontaszewski's comments, but I don't know whether for this particular location, whether finding those numbers is going to be the answer to this lease or otherwise. I think the two things are mutually exclusive, and this is probably a good highlight of where we need to have check-in points with council and with community about what some of these leases and what the long-term vision is for those sites. So, yeah, but I definitely think that some of those basics if we say the building's not up to scratch, we must have that's measured against something. So the cost of bringing it up to scratch, we should be able to get some numbers back fairly quickly, I would imagine.
Councillors, I'll speak to it because I think what else would you have us do? I mean, the ultimate opportunity for this discussion was before we embarked on the Robertson Park Development Plan, where we could have had these conversations that you've been raising tonight, Councillor Toppelberg, the sorts of considerations with the community. And the fact is it's come to us through a lease, not through discussion around what do we need to consult. You know, I think one of the responses in the briefing notes to us was that the scope of the Robertson Park Development Plan was the courts and the club rooms. Well, that's clearly incorrect. It is actually all of the green space. It includes dog walking areas. It includes a community garden. It was everything could have been in there, and it was recommended to us that it was taken out. So it may not fit here normally, but it's not really being dealt with in a way that's strategic or allowed us to really have these communications with the community in a way that would be much more transparent and actually engage on contentious issues. And we did that at Banks Reserve. Still didn't make it easy when we got to the point of actually having to implement the decision around the demolition of Banks Reserve Pavilion, but at least we could go back and demonstrate that we'd had the discussion, that we'd had the master plan, that we talked about what would be in its place, that we talked about the merits of removing the building to open up the views to the river, to stop that bottlenecking of walkers and bikes around the building. We had that discussion, it was transparent, and it was still a tough decision. Having a discussion about whether we should be demolishing a building as part of a leasing arrangement when we currently have a development plan afoot is not acceptable to me. And so that is why I'm supporting the amendment, because we have to get the information where we can get it. And in this way, it's been presented to us through a lease. Any further comments on the amendment?
Can I just see the wording on the screen?
Wendy, do you have the wording? It's not working. Do you want to go over to see Wendy and just check it? And perhaps you could shout it out. Oh, not working at all. Not just that you can't get it on the screen, that you've got complete failure over there. Okay. Do we need to handwrite this, get back to old school? Do you want to repeat the amendment?
I can give it a go.
Yeah, I think you're going to have to.
It was to require the CEO to provide a condition and compliance assessment and costs of works to for renewal and upgrade of the facilities at Halverson Hall by November 2020. By November 2021. I'm sorry, it should be to provide a report to a council meeting on the condition and compliance assessment and costs for renewal or upgrade works to the facilities at Halverson Hall to come to council in November 2021.
And that was seconded by Councillor Toppelberg. So is there any further debate on the amendment? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? I declare that carried. We're back to the substantive. Are there any further amendments or comments? Councillor Fotakis.
Just looking to make sure if I close off debate and actually put my amendment on the table, and thanks to everybody I just really wanted to hear whether there was the same level of concern from fellow councillors. So two of the, just the small amendments to what's proposed from admin, the initial term to go from 2 years to 4 years, not a change in the option period. And the reason why I identified the 4 years is that the officer's report did identify that there's no current or anticipated plans to undertake works or to repurpose the premises. We've already identified tonight that there's no capital works budget allocated. We've still got the asset management strategy to come forward. So I think that time is adequate for us without binding council into a longer lease. And while that body of work is done, we can still actually have the service still being able to the studio still being able to operate. The second amendment on there is relating to special condition 2.12, the redevelopment or demolition clause, a removal of that because I just don't see that as being necessary. I didn't think that it was appropriate within the context of this lease. So it's proposing to remove that from the recommendation.
Is there a seconder for the amendment? Seconded by Councillor Castle. You have outlined it quite well. Councillor Fotakis, do you wish to speak to it any further? Councillor Castle.
I think that the issues have been covered very well tonight and I'm supportive of this amendment.
Councillors, any further commentary in relation to the amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? It's been carried. We're back to the substantive. Is there any further comments for those who haven't already spoken to substantive or any further amendments? Okay, we'll put the motion as amended. All those in favour? Declare that carried. Okay, moving on to item 12.2, Council Proceedings Guidelines and Minor Amendment to Meeting Procedures Policy. Moved by Councillor Toppelberg, seconded by Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just for those who've got nothing better to do with their life, reading the Local Government Act. So the section that relates to question time. So what we're proposing is to, we've got a proposal to amend our meeting procedures. So to say the presiding member may close public question time after a minimum of 15 minutes or earlier if there are no further speakers. The language in the Local Government Act says the minimum time to be allocated for the asking of and responding to questions raised by members of the public at council or council meetings are to be in accordance with the regulations. So if the regulations change to allow 30 minutes, 12 minutes, whatever it may be, our meeting procedures may be out of alignment with it. So should we not have our guidelines to say the presiding member may close public question time when there are no further speakers or after allowing the minimum time required by the regulations? Would that, if that's a question, would that not be a better representation of the Act rather than putting the 15 minutes in there?
Through Mayor Cole, that would be appropriate as well. The Act would always override, of course.
Yeah, I've been in the chamber where I've seen people have issues with some of those sorts of things. It's probably better not to have it in there. So I will just propose an amendment so that...
before you do that, just a seconder, do you wish to speak to it? No, back to you.
Thank you. So the meeting council proceedings guidelines. So point 7 says the presiding member may close public question time after the minimum time as required by the regulations or earlier if there are no further speakers.
Can I just ask a question? What about if there are no speakers whatsoever?
That's no further speakers by my definition.
Further usually means more. No. Do you have any, just a query on the wording of the amendment? No further speakers. Does that cover if there are no speakers whatsoever?
Through Mayor Cole, I believe it would.
That's good enough for me. Okay.
Can I just make one comment on that wording after the minimum time as required by the regulations? The intention of this guidelines was to kind of simplify and combine a lot of things. So my only concern with that would be you then have to go and look at the regulations if you want to check what the minimum time required is.
Yeah, my only comment is that the point of it is that the Local Government Act itself does exactly that. We do it with our fees and charges. You try and work out what it's like to try and put a development application at the city. You've got to go back and look at the regulations for that. And we don't even provide the links on our website. So I think for the meeting procedures, I'm quite happy if someone wants to look that hard, they'll find it.
Thank you. That was seconded by Councillor Loden. Do you wish to speak to? Oh no, so I need a seconder of the amendment. Seconded by Councillor Loden. Thank you. Is there any further comments on the amendment? Councillor Fotakis.
Just a clarification that that amendment pertains to both the council briefing meetings and the ordinary meetings of council. Is that clear?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's fine. We'll make the change everywhere it's mentioned.
Sorry, except that the regulations don't cover council briefings, so it'll only be to the council meetings.
Okay. We all love
Yes.
governance.
Through you, Mayor Cole, unless we do still want to refer to that just for the actual amount of time.
The amendment as proposed only refers to council meeting procedures guidelines, so not to the. So that someone else wants to amend away, but it was only to make sure it's consistent with the Act, that's all.
Don't take us down that rabbit hole, please. Okay, we have an amendment before us. Are there any further comments on it? I have to be honest, I could take this one or leave it, but I'm happy to go with you if it makes you happy. Okay, I'm putting it. All those in favour? It's amended. We're back to the substantive. Any further comments? Oh, sorry. My apologies. Just confirming that Councillor Hallett voted against the amendment. Wendy? Thank you. Sorry about that. We're back to the substantive now. So I'll put that. All those in favour? Declare that carried. Takes us to the last item of business for Council tonight is the information bulletin. Item 12.3. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Someone raised it. Councillor Fotakis, Councillor Castle seconding.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of questions. Just let me get notes open. Attachment 9, the Register of Reports to be actioned. Just a question on page 1, 22nd of June 2021, the management agreement with Vincent Tour Library, lease to be supplied 13th of August. Just checking that that has been supplied.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I'd need to confirm that. I'm not aware off the top of my head.
I have signed it. I recall that. But I'm not sure if it's actually what has happened to it since then, because it goes back to the CEO's office. So, David.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can check the lease index and.
Thank you, Mayor. Just an additional question, and it came about when I was looking through the reports and looking at the report that's due to come back to Council in October 2021, and that's with regards to, well, it came up when we were looking at ceasing the Manor Inc. service at World Square, and the report was to Council to receive a report no later than October 2021 relating to the provision of a food service in the Perth Northbridge area and any changes to the activity and usage of World Square. So the question is, are we on track to receive that report in October? And I would like to actually inquire whether that will also include funding services such as the outreach worker service at World Square provided by Uniting Care West that the city funded, whether it will include an update to that as well.
Mayor Cole, that's in my portfolio. I'll have to take the question on notice and let you know.
I did, reason why I highlighted that as well, because when I was reading back on the minutes from that meeting, there was also a resolution where Council had required the re-establishment of the Safe Events and Advisory Group with a report to come back to Council for our November ordinary meeting to consider the terms of reference representatives, including WA Police, Noongar Outreach, Uniting WA in the Ranger Services, and community and council member representation. Can I get an idea about where we're at with the re-establishment of the Safer Vincent Advisory Group? Because I do see that will have implications for that report and would have provided very important information or very valuable information back to council.
Through my call, I happen to know because there was a meeting last week about this particular matter and the Safer Vincent plan, and the intent of administration is to set up the meetings after the election.
Okay, so that's with an anticipation that after the election, which is middle of November, is that enough time to get a report back to November's ordinary council meeting?
Through my call, I'd have to check the dates and the timings on that. So I have to take that question on notice.
And through Mayor to the CEO, I just want to get some understanding when council make these resolutions, and I'm looking through the report, and there just appears to be, and this isn't the first time that resolutions of council do get missed in the reporting. Just a question as to what the CEO sees as a potential remedy to this, and whether if I need to move a resolution this evening asking for the Register of Reports to contain more detailed information, I will do. But it is concerning to me that things such as the establishment of that group, which was a clear motion from council, clear request from council, doesn't seem to really be captured anywhere in any of the reports.
Through Mayor Cole, the responsible officers do update this on a monthly basis, so this should be current each time that it's presented to council, but we'll come back to that report. We should better make that report for October on the situation at World Square, and we will be advertising for all the community members for the advisory groups shortly, in anticipation of the reformation of the advisory groups straight after the election. And I think we'll have all the elected members appointed after the election at the same time for all the current advisory groups that we have constituted, and that'll include the constitution of the Safer Vincent Advisory Group.
I just want to get some understanding as to why it's taken this long. I mean, this resolution was passed in October last year. We're now in August, so we're now looking at 10 months down the road. So just want to get an understanding what the delays have been.
Through Mayor Cole, we don't have a good reason for that group not to be formally established with the terms of reference, but the officer has been meeting with all the stakeholders that you mentioned, and there will be a community safety forum held at North Perth Bowling Club next week as well.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. I understand that that's been organised by the state member for Perth and Minister for Local Government, Minister for Housing, Mr John Kerry. What has the city's involvement been in organising that? I mean, I know that we're certainly supportive of it.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we'll have officers attending, including our Safer Vincent officer, the manager of Rangers, and I'm intending to be at that meeting with Mayor Cole as well.
Well, I look forward to actually, I do look forward to actually hopefully being here to receive that report. I'm not too sure, but I will watch with interest. I mean, it is a matter that when this issue came before council last year, it was one in which there was quite a high degree of distress from local residents. It was a matter that really council had been working towards and asking to be resolved. So would like to get some appreciation. Anecdotally, we're told that activities around World Square have improved, but I think considering that the matter was actually passed as a council resolution, we haven't had a meeting of the Safer Vincent Advisory Group. It's a very key issue for this area. I would like to see that some priority is given, or an increasing priority to these issues moving forward.
Thanks. Through you, Mayor Cole, we did receive a large number of complaints about the situation at World Square and the food service specifically leading up to that decision. And I've been meeting on a regular basis with the CEO of Noongar Outreach Services as well. And the feedback from Noongar Outreach Services in particular is that the situation has settled substantially. And I can't recall receiving a complaint about World Square this year in response to the same sort of issues around antisocial behaviour that we are receiving prior to Council's decision.
Thank you, CEO. Just on that, so we'll request that report that's due to come before Council in October does very clearly include the impact of the other services funded by Council. So we'll check with you, Mayor, on a procedural motion whether I should raise that as an amendment to the report or just raise it as an issue.
So this would be in response to the, if you're amending the information bulletin, which particular section would this be relevant to? Just
okay, it's on page 4 of the reports, the register of reports to be actioned, attachment 9, update on Manor Inc. meal service at World Square.
yeah, I think you can do it as amendment as long as you say in relation to this action of Council. Would that be acceptable to add that in, given that it's in relation to an action outstanding?
I think, through you, Michael, I think it is a reasonable thing to request. So I'm sure we will be able to do it.
So is it under Register of Reports to be actioned?
Correct, yes. So it's on attachment 9, Register of Reports to be actioned. It's on page 4. So the date is 20th of October 2020. The actual resolution from Council is that the report relating to the provision of a food service and any changes to the activity and usage of World Square. So I would also like to add that provides Council with to include the impact of other services funded by City of Vincent, such as the funding of the outreach worker service in World Square provided through Uniting Care West.
Any issues?
Through Mayor Cole, the only thing I'm thinking is that it's an information bulletin, not particularly a report directly based around Manor Inc., and it might be more appropriate to progress as a notice of motion.
Well, time is of the essence and we don't have a notice of motion opportunity now under our meeting procedures local law. So unless there are any governance issues around it, I think if it's just a request for information to be included in that report, I think that's fine.
Through Mayor Cole, yes, and as long as I think it's not inconsistent with the previous report as well. I haven't checked that, but trust that it's not.
Even if it was notes Council's interest in receiving additional information in relation to.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. So if we put the amendment do we need to specify the attachment? So you've got those details, just notes the additional Council's request for additional information on the impact of other services funded by Council, such as the funding of the outreach worker service provided through Uniting Care West. So if that's clear enough.
Is there a seconder for the amendment? Seconded by Councillor Castle. Any discussion? Okay, we'll put the amendment. All those in favour? Declare that carried. We're back to the substantive. Any further comments? Councillor Gontaszewski.
I just want to, oh, sorry, Councillor Castle.
Sorry?
Sorry, I am the seconder of the motion. I was wondering if I could speak.
Sorry.
As the seconder?
Yes. Well, I've actually moved it already.
No,
and you
no,
didn't.
the seconder of the motion.
Of the motion?
Yeah. Or are you of the substantive?
Sorry. You reserved your right, so yes, you can speak now.
I had a question around reporting on street tree removals, and just to the CEO, can you remind me how often we report on that and when the next report is due?
Through Mayor Cole, the Executive Director, well, we do report quarterly. I think that was a change requested by Councillor Toppelberg from monthly to quarterly, and I think that is due next month.
Thank you. Can I, not necessarily going to move an amendment to it, but can I request some more information be included in that report in the future to indicate where street trees are replaced, whether they are native or exotic, and also a percentage of natives and exotics that are being used for replacements in our street trees?
Through Mayor Cole, yes. And just to clarify, you're seeking an indication of the percentage of replacements which are native or exotic?
Yes, where we are planting new trees, can we include in the information whether they're, a column in the table would be great, but also some summary so that we can track that data over time.
Do you wish to move an amendment? Okay. Councillor Gonchevsky.
I guess I just wanted to get some understanding in relation to the information bulletin, the register of reports to be actioned as to, in light of the some of the issues around the council decisions not ending up on this report. I think BD Part 2062 was one as well. How the CEO, what process is in place to ensure that the minutes of council that contain actions are accurately then transcribed into this document?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we were going to make it clearer at the front of this document if there was a major change to potential timeframe for when a report was requested by council, and to give the reason for that delay if there's been further consultation or engagement, or if there, in this case, you mentioned BD Part 2062, that there was, it's been 2 meetings of the steering committee, and the decision was not to bring a public report to council, but to have that discussion as a workshop item rather than a public council document at this stage.
Sorry. So if you've got a council decision that's requesting something to come from council, a subgroup or a working group that has no decision-making authority can make a decision not to bring a public report forward if that was the decision of council? Is that what you're... Do I need to clarify in my amendments where I'm adding things in as to when I say the word council, I mean council? Or how do I as a council member ensure clarity in that regard so that when I'm putting forward an amendment, I don't see that intention changed by a group that doesn't have any decision-making authority?
Through Mayor Cole, no, the time frame is clear. What we don't have a very good mechanism on is making sure we clearly convey to council through this document if there has been a reason why a particular report, a technical reason or process reason, that a report can't be provided by the required date.
That's fine. I would think that CEO, as the person ultimately responsible for the preparation of agenda, it would be within your authority to bring forward a report on why a report couldn't be provided. It wouldn't have to be long. But I guess I was more just wanting to clarify, you said that the officers update this report. What role do you play in ensuring this report's accuracy? Through
Mayor Cole, I do approve the entire agenda, so that's I do have final sign off on all the items in the information bulletin.
Okay. Yeah, I think that this would be worth some discussion with council on the format for the provision of this information, particularly in line with our future discussions around like project variation and so on, so that we can ensure that we've got a process where everyone understands what the decision on the information bulletin means, if there's going to be any changes going forward. And that might be a worthwhile workshop discussion. But other than that, I have no comments.
Thank you. Look, I just also want to comment on that. I think that we do need to have dates included. Like if the report had a date at which council had requested for an update or report to be provided, I think that needs to be also part of the table. And if it's been given or taken in the past that a date has changed in the information bulletin and therefore that date has been adopted by council, I don't support that view, and that does need to be discussed, because council's action in relation to the information bulletin is to receive the information bulletin, which is a passive and not active decision-making process. And particularly if you're stating, and I haven't seen the advice to Councillor Toppelberg, so I'm happy to receive that and read it, but to potentially perceive the information bulletin as a way of amending a council resolution on a time frame, that's not appropriate. And it would need to be that there's actually a decision made by council to an extended deadline of a motion that's already been adopted. So I think that it would benefit from having dates at which the report was due to council, and it's fine for the information bulletin to state why that hasn't happened, but in receiving the information bulletin, that can't be taken as council's endorsement of a new time frame.
Yes, you, Mayor Cole, in a similar way that we do with the audit log, for instance, the audit committee, we could extract out, as opposed to just receive the information bulletin and note any particular updates, or if there are any deadlines which are being proposed to be changed.
So I guess there needs to be a mechanism then. Can we have dates added to the register of reports to be actioned of the date at which they were due to be actioned? And can we have further review of this to ensure that it captures all of it? And can we just have some consistency around advice that any change to that through the information bulletin is not an endorsement by council of a revised date, it's simply information to council. And similar as Councillor Gontaszewski has highlighted, we've talked about the same thing with project management and scope changes, and that they need to be active decisions. This is the same, this is even more important because these are adopted motions of council.
Yes, Mayor Cole, we do have it on the agenda for the council workshop next Tuesday to have a discussion around the project management framework, and we'll review the format of the information bulletin, probably do that against the way we're presenting the audit log to the audit committee, which has dozens of action items and dates attached to it, and then the audit committee then does note or confirm when there's been changes to particular items if there's a justifiable reason for that.
Thank you, CEO. I think also if there are going to be changes to dates, I'm not sure if the information bulletin is the vehicle or whether that needs to be pulled out as a standalone item if there's requests for council to change dates. If it's just noting that it's not been delivered in time, that's one thing, but if it's then given that that's approved, that's something different. Is there any further discussion on the information bulletin? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare that carried. We don't have any motions this evening, and we don't have any confidential items. So I will thank everyone for your attendance and close the meeting at 8:53 p.m. Thank you.